Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gaelin Elmore.
So I have to admit, not too often when I get a chance to do this, am I crying before I get up on stage. So bear with me if there's a few more tears than normal today. The floodgates have been opened and I'm just gonna embrace it. Second, I wanna ask us to give another round of applause to our award recipients. In all seriousness, I feel like I should be sitting in the crowd and I should listen to each one of them have my time today because there's so much impact, change, and transformation that is being done through the work and through the professions that they each have chosen in the paths they walk. Show of hands if you've ever heard the quote, "Life is a game of chess, not checkers." I know you're eating, but raise them high. All right, keep your hand raised if you know how to play the game of chess. Okay, keep your hand raised if you're good at chess. So for me, that quote means a lot because I think what it's communicating is that there's a complexity to life, to our decisions, to the roles, the different people that play a massive part in our experience that chess can really represent and checkers cannot. Checkers is a very black and white game. You can only move certain directions. There's certain rules you have to abide by. But when we talk about the game of chess, there's so much variance, so many opportunities and potential to succeed and to fail. And that's true with life. Regardless of your path, regardless of who's in your life and what happens, there are really two options: to either rise to your potential or fall to circumstance. Even as a kid, in visitations with my own biological father early on in life, we would play chess. We'd sit down at the McDonald's. My dad would prevent me from playing in the play place right on the other side of the glass window, and we would sit there and we would play chess. It's not a typical 6-year-old idea of fun, but I got pretty good at it. Little did I know how much chess would become a metaphor for my life. A metaphor for me rising to my potential or falling to the circumstances around me. The truth is, I really shouldn't be here today. If it was up to me, if it was up to my own decisions, up to my own circumstances, I wouldn't be on this stage. Would you believe me if I told you that the difference between rising to potential and falling to circumstance has a lot more to do with you, those in the audience today, than it does the person going through that life? Would you believe me? Because that's true for me. My success, me being here today, me being a quote unquote success story, if you will, has a lot more to do with those in my life than it did with me just being a special, gifted, unique person. Let me explain. At the age of 16, I was sitting very uncomfortably in a desk in my sophomore geometry class. The reason I say uncomfortable is because I was 6'4" then too. Those desks are not designed for people who look like me, my size. And as I sat there uncomfortably, there was a call down from the office. And the secretary said, "Mr. Erickson, can you send Gaelin down to the office, please?" Now, my classmates responded like mature teenagers would. "Ooh, Gaelin's in trouble. What'd you do this time?" And as I got my stuff and headed to the office, one of my classmates said, "See you never." And so I turned into the hallway and I started to think about, what did I do this time? See, I was a frequent flyer to the office. I had some miles built up, and I knew that most of the times that I went, it wasn't a good thing. So I started to rack my brain. I was like, okay, I didn't get in a heated debate with Mr. Lindenberg this week. I didn't do that. I haven't skipped a class in a while. Then I was like, oh, I did make a pretty sketchy joke in Miss Wilson's class earlier today, but she likes me, so I'm not gonna get in trouble, I promise. And as I got to the office, Dawn, our secretary, sent me to the conference room. Big uh-oh. Like, oh no, not the principal's office? I want to go in the principal's office. No, they sent me to the conference room. And so I walk into the room, and I kid you not, the superintendent, principal, athletic director, football coach, basketball coach, and all of our school counselors were sitting in the conference room. First thing that came to my mind, Miss Wilson did not like my joke. Much to my surprise, I sat down in their office, and the first question they asked me was about my dad. They said, Gaelin, have you spoken to your dad lately? Without thinking about it, as though it was a reflex, I responded, yes. But the truth was, I hadn't heard from him in 3 days. I had been home alone for 3 days, hadn't told anyone, and I was telling these people, right to their face, a lie. After they sorted through the lie, they ended up saying, Gaelin, we know that's not true. Your dad was arrested. We have to find a place for you to go. And as a 16-year-old, one that had been in foster care from the age of 5 months off and on until I was almost 13 years old, the last place I wanted to be was back in the foster care. When they told me my dad was arrested, I blacked out. I have a really good memory, and I do not remember anything else they said. I was just thinking about what my next move was going to be. And I came up with a decision. I decided that I was going to leave that office, that conference room, and I was going to drop out of school. That I was going to drop out of school, and no one in that building, in that town, in that community would ever hear from or see me again. That was it. Now, despite that decision, despite me making that decision, I'm still here in front of you today. Despite over 20 different foster homes in my experience, 5 years of abuse, 3 times being homeless, 3 times experiencing homelessness, despite all of it, despite everything in my past that tells me that I should not be here, I still am. And again, it's not because of me, but those around me. It's because of this thing called belonging. You see, belonging is an important, fundamental, and vital part to every single person's development. Yours, those you work with, the kids you serve, me, the children we saw in those videos. It is vital to every single person's development. There are 3 ways that belonging can be broken down, and I want to share them with you today. The first component of belonging is a yearning for connection. Why is that important? A yearning for connection relates to every person's subconscious need to belong, need to be connected to a group or a community of people that care about them and know them. Neuroscientists have found that belonging is used by the same neural networks that communicate hunger and thirst to each and every one of us. So when we feel a lack of belonging, it's a lack of belonging that our body is communicating to us, not something that we are communicating to our bodies. Second is a need for positive regard. Every single person, in order to reach their full potential, needs to know that there are people out there who care about what happens to me. Beyond what I provide, beyond the results that I give or the money that I make or the status that I hold, that they care about what happens to me because I am a human and I deserve that. The need for positive regard is so fundamental. As a kid going through foster care, as a kid that stayed in so many different homes, new communities, new schools, I needed to know that there were people out there that cared about what happened to me. And finally, a desire for personal connection. A desire for personal connection means it is important and fundamental for each and every one of us to see and be known on an intimate level with a few people in our lives. To have one positive relationship with a caring adult. I know that's a common one. But we all have a desire to be known so that we don't have to explain our rationale, so we don't have to communicate why we are the way that we are, so that the children that are experiencing trauma and abuse that are on the receiving side of the work we're doing in Omaha don't have to communicate every decision they make and every bad choice they might make based on the stuff that has happened to them. These three needs are pivotal and fundamental if we want children that come from tough backgrounds to be everything they can be. Because it's not enough to tell them they can be someone, do something with their life, but we have to continue to communicate and meet needs so that they can reach that. If we want to oversimplify it, it can be broken down into these three things. I know the font's a little small, but every person has this need, this desire to feel important, feel like they matter, feel like they have value. Again, as someone who experienced consistent childhood trauma, consistent abuse, consistent neglect, consistent instability, insecurity, these feelings, these beliefs were scarce. A few years ago, as I finally built up the courage to go through my own file from foster care, I came across the report. And the report quoted me as I spoke to my social workers saying and asking and pleading, why am I not adopted yet? Now, that's a sad statement in itself. If you are a compassionate person, it makes your heart jump. But what stopped me in my tracks so easily was the fact that I was saying that about my abuser. I knew that the abuse that I was on the receiving end of was not good. I knew that I didn't deserve it. I knew that I was better than that I deserved more. But still, being faced with the opportunity of having nothing and having something that was negative, as a kid, I wanted the negative. I was willing to accept abuse if it meant that I would be claimed. I was willing to accept something that was bad and traumatic if it meant that someone publicly had to make a statement and say, I want Gaelin. The reason I'm here today is because of the people in my lives that have provided belonging in a way that allowed me to rise to my potential instead of falling to my circumstance. And I found that belonging through what I call CARE. It's a CARE model, it's a CARE acronym, if you will, 4 commitments that people, adults primarily in my life, made that helped me overcome the trauma that I experienced. And I want to share them with you. By the age of 6, when I had experienced instability, insecurity, consistently, nonstop, by moving foster homes, moving to different communities, going back with my biological parents and being removed again. By the age of 6, I was placed in a home with my 2 biological sisters for the first time. We were placed in a home, and almost immediately the abuse started. The first experience of abuse was because I didn't eat my dinner the night before. The abuse was relentless. It continued for everything you can imagine. Falling asleep in church, not doing my chores, getting a call home from school. But by far, the worst was when I overslept and missed the bus to go to school. There are a couple of different reasons. One, and if you're an educator, you might know, school was one of the only safe spaces that I had consistently. It was one of the only places that I could go and I could experience belonging, where I could be myself, where I could let jokes off without fear of retribution, even though Miss Wilson didn't like that joke that one day. Where I could be myself and talk out of turn and show my personality and debate and be a kid. And so when I missed an opportunity other than the weekends or summer or holidays where I couldn't go, I was really frustrated with myself when it was because of my own decisions or lack of preparation. So there was one time when I was in 4th grade when I overslept and missed the bus, and I woke up and I told myself, I'm not just going upstairs today to accept the abuse that's coming. I'm going to try to do something about it. And so I make this decision to walk to school. Now, I'm going to date myself a little bit. This is a time where kids don't have smartphones. Honestly, no one has smartphones. Google, Apple Maps do not exist. If you wanted to get the fastest route from point A to point B, you had to go up to the computer room, turn on the slow, loud computer, and print off stuff from MapsQuest. Now, being that I overslept and that I'm trying to sneak out of the house and walk to school, that was not an option. So I left the house that morning, I snuck out, and I took the only route I knew, my bus route. Yeah, just let that simmer for a little bit. The laughter is because we all know that the fastest way from point A to point B is not the bus route. If anything, that might be the slowest route to go. So I, as a fourth grader, sneak out of the house and I begin my little journey with my backpack that is not bigger than me because I was still a big kid in fourth grade, all right? But I start my journey and I walk my bus route from memory. Right before I hit the home stretch to my school, there was a Route 66 gas station on the corner, and I remember I walked in, and I was so dehydrated. I looked at the guy, and before I even said a word, he was like, "You can have whatever you want, man." And so, like a well-educated, mature fourth grader, I went to get the big gulp, and I got every soda I possibly could. One after the other, just soda, Sprite, Coke, Fanta. And I chugged it. I chugged it so fast, and I got another one before I left. It not only dehydrated me more, it didn't help, but it gave me enough energy to continue my journey. And so I get to school, I buzz in, and there was no voice on the other side of the intercom. I'm like, that's weird. I buzz in again. Eventually, they open the door. They don't say anything. Normally, it's like, "Hey, good morning, Gaelin." I'm like, "Good morning to you, too." Sheesh. So I go into the office, and when I turn the corner, every single lead teacher in the entire school is there. And before I could even get a word out, they all rushed me. They hugged me. Some were crying. Some kissed me. Some shook me and was like, "Gaelin, what were you thinking?" And I'm caught off guard by the emotion. I'm like, "Hey, there are some of you in here that don't even like me. What is all the commotion?" And as they're all like telling me stuff and trying to figure out, get answers for what happened, I catch a glimpse of the clock on the back wall. I left my home a little bit after 9 o'clock thinking I could beat the 12:30 bell for inexcused absences. The clock read a little bit after 2:55. It had taken me almost 6 hours to walk to school. I ended up finding out that at the 12:30 attendance check, they ended up calling home. My foster parent told them I was not there, and they said I wasn't at school. And so commotion ensued. Chaos ensued. Eventually, I find out that the police were out looking for me for the last 2.5 hours. And that everyone in the school knew that Gaelin was missing. And so I got to the office, and the first thing I had to do after all the commotion died down was talk on the phone to my abuser. And the only thing she said when I picked up the phone was, "You know you effed up, right?" I had to fight back my fear and say, "Yes, ma'am." She hung up. I didn't even go to class. I sat in the office until the bell rang, and they basically sent me on my bus. I got on my bus, I went home to the worst abusive encounter I had with my foster parent. But something that day changed. Something that was visible changed. I got on the bus, and my sister, who had known, they had asked her questions about my whereabouts. She had known that I had been missing, that I was going to get in trouble. And when she saw me on the bus, not terrified, not frozen in fear, she hit me on the shoulder. She's like, "Gaelin, you okay?" Not out of concern, but out of worry, something's not right here. And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "You know it's about to happen, right?" Because I was joking with my friends, I was being me. And we knew at a certain point when abuse is on the end of any trip or any endeavor, that it changed how we showed up in that space. But what my sister didn't know or understand was the conversations I had for the 10, 15 minutes that I waited in the office. I ended up finding out that one of my previous teachers had actually called the police against the wishes of the rest of staff because she remembered a conversation that I shared years before while in her room about being abused. And so when they called home and they found out I wasn't there, and my foster parents said I wasn't there, which I wasn't, she thought something serious had happened to me. And so she called the police from her personal cell phone. And so for the first time in my life, police were out looking for me out of concern and not out of guilt. Police were in pursuit of me because I had value or mattered, not because I was a criminal or a fugitive. Which when I had ran away before or had previous encounters, that's all I felt like. What I found out that was every lead teacher in the school, when they found out I was not where I was supposed to be, gave their class over to their aides and their paras so that they could brainstorm and try to help find where I was. There was a compassion that was communicated that day that changed my life. There was a compassion, there was empathy and sympathy that drove people into action on my behalf to try to alleviate it, that changed my perspective about relationships, about caring adults in my life and in my experience. That compassion changed my commitment to show up in school in a new way. Made me think a little bit harder about the jokes that I tried to let fly, or what would get me sent out of class, or what would jeopardize the relationships that I was building. The truth is, everyone in this room has a role in life in some way, shape, or form where you can show compassion, where you can be driven into action on the behalf of vulnerable children, vulnerable populations in Omaha and everywhere else that can change the trajectory of someone's life, change their willingness to receive help, change their willingness to trust and to let people in and to be valued. That compassion ended up changing so much. I committed to school in a new way. It changed my perspective, and there were so many unique stories, unique experiences I had in that school that although I was getting abused when I was home, although I had a terrible experience outside of those walls, I was committed to something, I had hope, and I had a belief in a better future for myself because of the people in that building. Another one I want to tell you about is our janitor from that school. Yeah, our janitor. Her name was Miss Peanut. Her name was Miss Peanut because she was about 4'2". Yeah. In kindergarten, in first grade, I was taller than her. No joke. Like, we took a picture and I was like this. She has to be the world's shortest janitor, and I love her to death. But Miss Peanut's size was the only thing that was small about her. She had such a big heart, and she had such a passion to care for the kids in that building. Every single one, regardless of what they looked like, where they came from, whether they were nice to her or not, which most people were, because if you weren't, people would fight you. But you don't mess with Miss Peanut. But she was awesome. And the thing about being a janitor is, like, in our society, it's not a glamorous role. It's not one that you get praised for doing really well. It's not one that kids grow up like, I want to be a janitor one day. And that's no shade to anyone that's in that profession. It's just how our society treats them. And so Miss Peanut, who lived like a block down from me in our foster home where we were being abused, she had run-ins with my foster parent. She got to see the real side that other people didn't see in our community, in the school, in the system. She had everyone else fooled but Miss Peanut. And so Miss Peanut would go out of her way to care for me and my siblings, to have conversations with us. And there was one specific time where I was sitting at lunch, and what was for free reduced lunch that day, I couldn't eat. And so I was sitting there starving as I'm watching all my friends and peers have homemade lunches, have money to go to the food cart, come back, and I'm sitting there starving. But so prideful to the point that I'm not telling anyone. Out of nowhere, Miss Peanut comes out from the back with a bunch of snacks in her hand. She comes to our table, she sits them down in front of me, no words were exchanged, and she kept going. There was another time when I had gotten in trouble, like I did, again, frequent flyer, gold medallion, where I was sitting in the office and she was walking through, and she walked past me right away, and then she saw me and she stopped. She came backwards. She was like, "What you doing here?" And I was like, "I got in trouble." And she proceeded to tell me how I was better than that, how I had so much potential and how I couldn't jeopardize it because of what my friends might have been doing. She continued to pour into me every single day I showed up at that school and every day that she showed up. And so she brings up this second part of the CARE acronym that I want to share with you, which is authenticity. Authenticity refers to the proven fact that something is legitimate or real. I couldn't count on my two hands the amount of times that I had friends' parents tell me that they were going to get me out of foster care. That I had a social worker saying, Gaelin, we're going to get you out of that home if it's the last thing I do. And I would never hear from them again. There were so many people that overpromised and underdelivered in my life that you just anticipated, that you pushed them away because the reality of having to deal with being in it alone is better than letting someone in and being let down. But Miss Peanut never overpromised. She never said she was going to bring me into her home, become licensed so she can take care of me and my siblings. She didn't say, I will be a great mom to you. She never talked about anything more than what she could provide. She was real. And the ways that she did that made a difference in my life and my story, so much so that I remember it to this day. She was able to do things that teachers couldn't because of the way that she authentically stepped into her role. Now, we have a lot of different professions in this room today. There are a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And you might, as we hear stories about judges, as we hear stories about people running foundations and teaching, you might disqualify the impact, the difference that you can make. And I'm here to tell you, are you being authentic? I'm here to ask you, are you being authentic? Because if we really want to be serious, there's something that an insurance salesperson could do. There's something that a secretary could do. There's something that every single body in this room can do so that they can be someone in the life of a child going through trauma. I can't tell you what that is. You have to make that decision for yourself. You're going to have to make that commitment to authenticity for yourself. For some people, it might mean money. For some people, it might mean time. I'm not here to tell you what is more valuable, but what ways can you get more plugged into the places where you call home so you can make a difference for those you rub shoulders with. Authenticity is a massive piece to the puzzle. Now, the stability that I felt in that school was not consistent. Actually, in 5th grade, I ended up running away with my sister and a foster sibling, or me and my sister this time, we ran away, and we were gone for over a month. After a month and a couple nights of sleeping at the local park and under bridges, we turned ourselves in. Scared because we had been let down by investigations and interviews and the system in the past. We turned ourselves in very reluctantly. This time it launched an investigation that got me and my sister out of the abusive home, but it immediately split us up. And at the end of my 6th grade year, I was being reunified with my dad. But that meant I had to leave my school. And when I tell you, I'm not exaggerating, the last day of school, my 6th grade year, I sat in the hallway crying, bawling my eyes out, not because I was excited to be leaving abuse and leaving foster care, but sad and upset that I had to leave my school. I was more sad to be leaving a place where I felt like I belonged than the potential of belonging at the one place I always wanted to be. That's how impactful belonging is. That's how impactful being in a place where you matter, where you have importance, and where you have value. And it changes everything you think about yourself. I ended up moving schools, and for 7th grade, I was in a new school. 8th grade, I was in a new school. 9th grade, I was in a new school. The stability that I experienced in my elementary school was long gone. I'd grown cold to shutting people out and not letting people in, and then my sophomore year was the first time that I was at the same school for the 2nd year in a row since I was in 6th grade. And that was when my dad was arrested. Now, there was a relationship there that started to grow and started to be developed, and it was with my high school counselors. As I was navigating, shutting people out, no one knowing my story, but navigating being homeless once again, my social workers wanted to know about my past and wanted to help me process it and help me in any way they could. So the day that my dad was arrested, they were like, Gaelin, we want you to come down to our office. We want to talk to you about next steps. And I went to their office. I obliged, but I didn't talk for the next 4 or 5 hours. Sat there silent. And I started to think about, what can I do to push these people away? What can I do to get them to stop asking questions, to stop bringing me out of class where I can hide in a really tiny desk and avoid talking about the things that I've experienced? And so I started to cuss them out. I started to push their buttons. I started to make fun of their job and where they went to school. Like, oh my gosh, you go to the University of Nebraska? Ha ha ha. There's like 1/6 of the room that laughed at that joke. I am feeling a little unsafe up here now, Gene. But I started to push their buttons, tried to push them away. And much to my surprise, every day they would catch me outside on the way walking into the building, like, hey, Gaelin, can't wait to see you, 8th hour. Yeah, they changed my schedule to make me come down to their office every day and talk, or not talk, depending on how I felt. So much so that my sophomore year ended, I get my junior year schedule, and boom, right there, 8th hour, counselor's office. I was a good student, so I was able to graduate on time. Don't worry about that. But they continued to try to break down the wall, chisel at it, one conversation, one question at a time, to a point where one day, random day in my junior year, they asked the right question, and I answered it. I was like, that wasn't that weird. That didn't hurt as bad as I thought it would. And then they asked another question. And then they brought up this thing called reactive attachment disorder, and they started to explain things to me in a way that I had never heard before. And through that, my healing began. So the R in the CARE acronym, the CARE motto, is resilience. We talk about resilience all the time. But we talk about it in reference to kids. Oh my gosh, Gaelin, you're so resilient. I can't believe you did that. You're so tough. You're so gritty. If I had $1 for every time someone called me resilient, I might be able to survive inflation. Might. But you telling me or you telling kids that you serve that they're resilient does nothing. We think it's a cool compliment, but it literally is just words. But what you can do, you be resilient, that's going to change something. Resilience, the definition, by definition, it refers to something that can snap back to form after misfortune or change. So think about a rubber band being pulled and stretched. And then when you let it go, it snaps back to the same form that it was, unless it breaks. That's where self-care comes in. But the reality is your work is going to stretch you. Your work is going to push you. There are going to be times where people you want to help so badly don't want anything to do with it. But how are you going to snap back to form the next day? I guarantee you the 3 award recipients today, they have had many a time where people have rejected the help they've tried to give. But you keep doing it so that one day you go into a store or a mall and someone you tried to help in the past comes back wanting to accept it. We don't know what moment might be the moment that changes everything. So we have to stay ready. There's a saying in football that says, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. How are you being resilient? How are you continuing to show up even though the systems, or you don't have the support or the financing that you think you need or in order to make a difference? We have to be resilient in this room first and foremost. Because again, the kids that on the receiving end of the work that we're doing, they can be resilient all they want, but if they don't see it modeled in a positive and life-changing way, then it doesn't matter. The most resilient decision I could have ever made in my life was the decision to drop out of school, to get emancipated, I wasn't running. I believed that my ability to take my life in my own hands was greater than anyone else's. And that's how I was going to do it. Resilience has to be modeled in a way that it can be beneficial and not harmful. So the next time you find yourself complimenting someone for being so tough for going through something, ask yourself, how can I be tougher to help them? There's a hole in the story in the timeline that I've shared with you today. I haven't told you what happened after I walked out of that office and made a decision to drop out. As I walked out of that office and started making steps towards my locker to get my things and disappear, I broke down and started crying. I started to think, this is going to be the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than the abuse, harder than walking to school, harder than anything I've ever done. This will be it. And as I sat there trying to gain the strength, the power to go on, I feel the hand of someone that followed me out of the office. And it was my high school football coach. And before I could even stand up to look at him, he said, Gaelin, I can't imagine what you're feeling or what you might be going through. I don't have all the answers, but I want you to come live with us until we figure it out. One of the most life-changing gestures anyone ever made in my life. And you know what? My initial response was, thank you, no thank you. I was tired of putting hope, putting trust, belief in other people that were just going to let me down. And so I continued in my locker, committed to walking out of school. My counselors ended up finding me at my locker like, hey, Gaelin, we don't want you to go back to class. We want you to come talk to us. And that's how that relationship started. But little did they know I had no intention of going back to class. I was on my way out. And so I sat in their office the rest of that day, and after the bell rang, I tried to take my 6'4" stature and blend in with all these other midgets in the school and sneak out. And silly me, I walked out of the front door, didn't go out the back. Fugitive 101. And my high school coach was parked out front waiting for me. Door open, let's go. And so I move in. And those first 6 months, I tell people I was a tenant in their home that wasn't paying rent. I was a squatter. I would go up to my room after school. I would stay there until it was dinner time. They would force me to come down and have dinner with them. And then after dinner, I'd go right back up. That life-changing gesture did not change my life overnight. It was the commitment every day to show up in that same way. To show that commitment I made back in March 2012, I'm making it every day you allow me to. And so there was one night I was coming down to get Cheetos to snack on because I didn't sleep very well. I came down to get Cheetos and he was in the living room awake. And he was like, Gaelin, come in here and sit with me. So I sat down. And while we were watching SportsCenter reruns, he broke the silence and he said, Gaelin, I'm not trying to be your dad. I'm not trying to be anything you don't want me to be. But what I am trying to do is give you a break that you haven't gotten. And I remember that feeling like the first time in my life that someone was honest with me, that someone's compassion came out in their words and I didn't need to see any action behind it. Probably because for months up until that point, I saw his actions. And I remember this feeling of calm just rushing over me. And me believing in my mind, my heart, and my soul that I'll go anywhere and do anything this man asked me to do. The important part of that conversation is that he empowered me. You can be compassionate, you could be authentic, you could be resilient, but if you're not empowering those that we're serving, it's all for naught. You can be a voice for someone that doesn't have a voice, but if we're not actively working to make sure that they have a voice of their own someday, it's all for naught. My coach that day in that living room watching SportsCenter reruns, he told me that I'm trying to give you a break. That I'm not trying to be anything you don't allow me to be in your life. But what he was communicating is, I'm going to be here until we figure this out. Less than 4 months later, I had my first scholarship offer to the University of Minnesota. A week later, had a scholarship offer to the University of Nebraska. I had to throw that in there, I'm sorry. Because sometimes I tell people I went to Minnesota and they just think like, oh, he couldn't go here. And I was like that, I could. But I was able to find belonging through care. I was able to find opportunity because people committed to me in a way that I had not experienced before. As I close, I'm going to share this quote with you. I heard this a couple months back, and it changed my perspective of how we serve people and how we can create change. And it has 4 parts. It says, people change when they hurt enough they have to. People change when they see enough they're inspired to. People change when they learn enough they want to. And when they receive enough they are able to. We are here today because children and communities have already hurt beyond enough. We're not here having this conversation if that first thing isn't already checked. But what way can we commit to this work that it doesn't require someone to hurt enough in order to change, to experience better? What are we able to show them? What are we able to teach them? What are we able to give them so that they are able to rise to their potential instead of falling to their circumstance? My life changed completely when someone who was compassionate, authentic to what they can do, resilient and empowering, chose to show me enough, teach me enough, and give me enough so that I could change. You have an opportunity to do that through the work you're doing, through the partnerships that are happening in the Omaha area and in the state of Nebraska. I genuinely mean it when I share I should be learning from the 3 people that received awards today, because there is some pioneering, transformational work that is happening in this area that makes my heart smile. That makes my heart smile about what Project Harmony is doing. For me to know that there are kids that were once doomed to the fate that I experienced now get to experience something better. Where they get to experience belonging in a way that changes how they see themselves, the value, the matter, the importance they walk around and feel. So that one day they could be a success story, someone that rises to their potential instead of falling to their circumstance. Remember, it has a lot more to do with you than it does them. So what are you going to do? What's next? Yes, we have a great rest of the conference here, but when you leave here, when you go back to your day job, what's next? Are you going to commit to being that someone? Because that's the only way we could ever make a difference. The only way that we could ever be the difference in lives of vulnerable children everywhere. There's something to be said about the generational work that is happening when we do this. When we make those 4 commitments. Miss Peanut, my teachers, my coach, they had no idea the impact that would be made through my work and through my own family. I get a chance to be a dad to 2 precious daughters, and they will never experience someone not giving them enough, not teaching them enough, not showing them enough so that they could be everything they want to. That's the generational, life-changing, life-transformative end of a bad timeline and a bad story that changes families. All we have to do is make a commitment to care and make a commitment to be the difference.